You're listening to the Co-Creator Network. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Hey everybody, this is Maxine Taylor with another edition of Move into the Magic. And today I have two guests, and I am so excited to interview them. And I know that you're going to be excited when I tell you who they are and what they'll be talking about. First of all, my first guest is Ralph Ring. After he left the U.S. Army in 1954, Ralph began an ongoing search for answers to many questions concerning the unknown. And haven't all of us done that? So he fits right into our schedule. Ralph worked for the United States government, for a U.S. government-funded research facility in the areas of magnetics, levitation, and, get ready, here it comes, teleportation. His search eventually led him to the realities and participations of teleportation and esoteric consciousness. Ralph is a natural scientist and a creative technician who in the early 1960s worked together with Otis T. Carr. Now, some of you know that name. You know that he is a prodigy of Tesla. He worked with Otis Carr and a team of dedicated scientists on alternative technologies, one of which was teleportation. He was one of three to pilot a Man Made Spaceship, the OTCX-1. His dream since birth has and is to produce levitating homes, cities, and countries. He and his spiritual partner and wife, Marsha, talk on expanding consciousness and natural law, which enables people to see the simplicities of all things, thereby bringing their dreams closer to reality. And it should be no surprise to you that my second guest is Marsha Ring. Marsha, an ordained minister with Religious Science International in 1976, worked for Benfix Field Engineering Deep Space Tracking System, where she experienced tracking of unknown objects. While working there, she visited JPL Laboratories and heard a speaker express that they knew that there was life in space, just not sure how they could communicate with the other life. They'd mounted records and many other types of communication devices on the crafts they sent into space, trying to reach them. At that time, unfortunately, to no avail. Moving to Prescott, Arizona, she met and heard Ralph Ring's story of working with Otis T. Carr in the early 1960s. She became a good friend with Ralph and was delighted when he asked her to work with him on his speaking tours. In 2008, they joined together as spiritual partners and continue on their speaking tours on expanding consciousness and natural law, which enables people to see the simplicities of all things, thereby bringing their dreams closer to reality. Marsha and Ralph share their experiences and remind their audiences that we are much, much more than we realize. We are the ones we have been searching for. Ralph and Marsha, welcome, dear friends, to Move Into the Magic.
Thank you so much, Maxine. We're both here, Marsha.
Thank you, Maxine. Thank you for having us on your wonderful show.
Yes.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. So I'm just going to jump right in and ask you a question that kind of sounds like it's off the wall, but I know it's powerful. I understand you were raised in the wilderness. Can you tell us about that, Ralph? I assume I'm talking to Ralph and not Marsha.
Right. Well, the wilderness is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains in Northern California, and it's called the Paradise Ridge. It goes all the way up into infinity almost, and to a little known spot in the woods called Koodalink. And this was where I was raised all through the 8th grade. And we had to walk 7 miles round trip to school every day, my sister and I. So we became well acquainted in the woods walking with natural law. Everything we examined and discovered was quite natural and quite simple. So that's where I was in the early part of my life. When I got out into the outer world later on, I found things were seemingly backwards. They didn't adhere to natural law, or they were using force instead of simplicity, and it was a little confusing. But in learning about natural law and seeing how simple it was, I felt my purpose could well be in life to explain what I'd learned in natural law and try to affect a change so that life would be simpler, based on nature instead of man's ideas of nature.
And let me ask you this: Have you felt fulfilled in that area, Ralph? Have you feel like you've accomplished what you set out to do?
Well, we're 90. Well, I'd say 98% over the hill now, and coming down the other side. We for a long time it was a struggle because people didn't care to listen, or they were too busy to listen to the simplicities of change. But right now we're on a downhill slide. It's a snowball coming down the hill because people are not only wanting to wake up, but they're waking up to realize there's more to life than we ever dreamed possible.
And that's the truth. That is definitely the truth. Let me move forward then, not to the present, but a little bit in the past. You worked in a government-funded research lab. Now, based on what you just told me, you've got to explain how you wound up working in a government-funded research lab.
Well, it's a long story, but in the interest of time, I'll condense it a little bit. I had been diving. I had a diving business, and I had a career in diving. I worked for U.S. divers and Jacques Cousteau in Costa Mesa, California. And at that time, I was married and had children and a family to raise. So my wife at the time didn't appreciate the fact that I'd be out on the ocean for sometimes days and beyond, and in very precarious and dangerous situations. So she wanted me to get a job on land and settle down and raise the family and take the trash out and so forth. So one day she saw an ad in the paper that the lab tech wanted at a place called Advanced Kinetics that was in Costa Mesa, California. And she said, well, why don't you check into this? And I said, well, I don't know what my qualifications are. She said, well, you're tinkering with all these inventions, if you will, around the house and everything. You must have something to offer. Why don't you go try? So long story short, I went in and eventually became a part of the company. They assigned me to an engineer who just quit in a magnetic experiment they were working on, and my interest in life has always been magnetism. So they said, well, let's put you into this position. My job was to fire electrons through a magnetic and try to get to the other side without deflection. And I had a Polaroid camera, a giant Polaroid camera, and an oscilloscope. And each time I fired the electrons, they'd always deflect to one side or the other. At the end of the day, my experiment was chalked up in the thousands of dollars for actually doing nothing but repeating the same thing over and over. So because of my acquaintance with natural law and knowing the simplicity of how you can work with nature instead of forcing nature, I decided to go home with the experiment And also the experiment on the next bench over was levitation. They were levitating a steel ball with an iron magnet, an iron core coil, and they would burn them out at the rate of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 a day, and they were very expensive. So I decided, well, I'll take that one home. I can at least give them another place to look for levitation besides that experiment, because it was costing a lot of money. Well, anyway, long story short, I went home, and in those days I didn't have a lot of money raising a family, so a lot of my stuff came from garage sales, yard sales, or whatever. And I had this old television that I got in the yard sale. I tore it apart and got what in those days was called the cathode ray tube that fired the electrons to the screen of the television. And I effectively took it all apart and set the magnets up on my laboratory in those days was partly in the living room floor. So I set it up, and it was quite simple to set up. And when I effectively got ready for the experiment, the only thing I did differently was I pulsed the signal, which means I gave the electron a chance. In working with natural law, you have to become acquainted with the principles involved of whom or where or what you're working with. So I called this little guy, my electron, my friend, and I said, well, what would you like to do to get through this field? And it just said, I'm using a metaphor here, of course, but it just said, well, let me breathe. So that's where the pulsing came in. I allowed a millisecond or two. I don't remember exactly how long, but I allowed a delay in the signal when I fired the electron. And it went into a spiral. It's called a vortexual mechanical motion, and spiraled through the magnet and without deflection. There was no problem. And the next 20 or whatever times that I tried it, there was no deflection. So I figured, well, gee, this might be a raise. I can put tires on the car or something. And so I wrote it up, took pictures of it, and decided to take it into the to the lab. Well, I had a little time left, so I worked on this levitation device, which I had in the past seen an old 8mm film in Tibet, how they raised stones up the side of the hill to effectively build a temple. And the way they moved the stones with these long, elongated trumpets, I guess, or horns, if you will, and drums. And they would get in resonant frequency of the blocks they chose to move up this hill. And it's quite easy when you understand resonance. Whenever you come in a sympathetic resonance with something, you can affect a change. So acoustically, they were creating this sound which was resonated with the blocks, and they'd move them up the side of the hill. So what I did, I took there was a 15-inch woofer speaker that came out of the same television set that I tore down, and I set it on its backside on the floor and hooked up a little audio generator that I picked up at a garage sale for probably $25. And I kept playing with the sound waves until and different devices in the center of it until I wound up with a ping pong ball being levitated in the center of it. And it was late. I went to bed. I woke up in the morning. The ping pong ball was still levitating. And I don't remember. It was very. My wife's saying, "Hurry up! You got a lot to say." Okay. Anyhow, I wrote that one up and took pictures of it. And I went into Dr. Weinhardt. He was the head of the institute. And I said, I've got some ideas here that might make things easier for us. And he looked them over and saw what I did and everything. And he says, well, Ralph, I'll tell you, you're in an area that's I understand where you're going with this and what you've done and everything, but there's something I have to tell you here. This is a government-funded research and development laboratory, and we are paid to look for answers, not necessarily find them. And that really shook me up pretty bad. Because
it did.
It really did, because the whole idea, I thought, was to make things better, not just keep repeating the same things over and over, like a squirrel cage going round and round. So anyway, long story short, I didn't last very much longer there. I had to quit. It was hard because I was raising a family, but that was the end of the job. So, you got another question?
I do. You've brought up the question that is on everybody's mind: teleportation. It doesn't matter the details. The bottom line is, this is your specialty. This is your field. Now, I want to ask you a question about, I read here that it says that I've just got to ask you, did you consciously teleport outside time and space and then come back? Bottom line, is that your hobby, Ralph? I mean, what?
Well, it's not just my hobby, but you'll be surprised to know that we all do this. We're just not consciously aware of it. Transporting beyond time and space sounds like a magical mystery that goes on beyond science and everything, but actually we're doing it every day because we are creating our own realities here, and that's part of the consciousness that I wanted to talk about on your show.
Please.
Well, we're living in actually a dream that we've created, a big game, if you will, or a big dream. This is a dream. Reality is beyond. We went to sleep and are having this, was a beautiful dream that we made very uncomfortable. Now we have to get back to making it comfortable again. And what? Did you say something? No. Well, anyway, so that deals with the consciousness. When Carr was explaining to all of us the simplicities that Tesla put down in finding his discoveries in nature, he would just go into a meditative state, and they would come to him because they were outside the conventional ways of dreaming. They were visions more than dreams. And he explained this as consciousness that was beyond conventional thought. It comes with feeling, which is the intuition, and this is where Carr got all of his information. He see, am I getting ahead of myself here? Teleportation. Okay. So yes, I did meet Otis Carr eventually, because when I left my job, a group called Understanding out of Costa Mesa, California, invited me to come and speak about what I wanted to do with floating, getting things off the ground, getting the tire off the ground instead of running over our forests and fertile land and everything. Get the tire from a vertical to a horizontal position, make homes and cities and countries out of it. Well, anyhow, in the group, they were in touch with Otis Carr, who was at that time having trouble in Oklahoma developing spaceships. And he'd already put in for a patent with the idea of levitation and teleportation and resonant sympathetic vibrations and everything. And the patent office wouldn't accept it. They said, take these ideas out and we'll give you a patent on an amusement device, which they eventually did. And he had to set up an amusement device. But he said, well, we'll start there and build toys for kids to work with the ideas of magnetism and get people familiar with a force in nature that's non-ending. It's infinite. There is no there is no end to what you can do with magnetism. You can use it for fuel and go anywhere in the multiverse, if you will, without ever running out of fuel, because it's what's called the ethers. It's energy, and you can use that same energy for building things and moving things around. So, where was it? Well, anyway, they contacted Carr and they said, well, we've got a guy out here that wants to do a similar thing. What do you think? And he said, that's good. I'm in hot water out here. So they made the arrangements, and they brought him and his entourage out, and they put us up at Lake Arrowhead, California, and said, just why don't you guys get acquainted up there, and we'll find you a place to work, and you can get together and start building spaceships. So I said, fine. So I, during that time, I got acquainted with Carr. He was a brilliant soul. He was, the human part of him wasn't hardly even here. He was a multi-dimensional being that was in touch with realities that few of us understand. So we got really acquainted, and our understanding of natural law was just perfect. We knew that nothing would work unless you worked with nature, not against her. So a couple of weeks later, they gave us a call and said, we found a place for you guys to work. It's down in Hesperia, Apple Valley, which is just down the hill from where we were staying. And they said there's a facility down there with a large warehouse, and they have machine shops and and living quarters and laboratories all built in. So things, when you're in line with nature, things fall into place. You don't have to want or need for anything. You're following a procedure with nature that's quite natural. So everything kind of comes to you. You don't have to go looking for it. You don't have to want for anything. It just kind of falls into place. Hence, that's why we got this beautiful laboratory and warehouse. So anyway, eventually the consciousness of teleporting outside of time and space came into play when we were building prototypes and using them around the valley and in Apple Valley and Hesperia. And we had got to a point where our prototypes were already ready to share with the public, to bring them out. But the technology is quite different, because there wasn't any limitations to what we could do. And the idea of building these in the first place, the heart of the craft themselves, is what we call an electron accumulator. It accumulates the energy. It doesn't generate the energy. It accumulates it out of the what we call the ethers. The ethers are just another word for the 0 point, or the plasma state of, or the vacuum, if you will, in space, that until recently people felt there was nothing there, and actually everything exists in the ethers before it exists in what we call a dimensional reality. So, well, in teleporting, we tried to get a manufacturer. We'd gone as far, we were working out of our pockets, and everything was, we were funding all our own experiments and everything. But we couldn't go to the manufacturing stage unless we could interest somebody that was already there in our product. So our PR man, Major Wayne Aho, who was with us, contacted General Motors and asked to send a rep out. We'd like to talk to him about kind of moving the mode of transportation into a different field, which would include habitation and so forth. And So it was interesting enough to them where they sent a rep out, and we met with them. We took a small 12-inch model, a prototype that we had with us, and we met in one of the facilities in Riverside, I think it was, California. Anyhow, they came and they brought a couple of engineers, a physicist, and some other people with them. And they said, well, what do you want? And we said, well, we want to take the idea of motivation and transportation, everything off the ground, and utilize magnetism for its construction, for its maintenance, for everything, for its fuel as well. So we had to explain magnetism to them a little bit, which is the air we breathe is magnetic in energy, in essence, and the food we eat, everything we do, we're in a sea, just like the ocean, of magnetic energy. And this, when you understand it and work with it, can be tapped into. You don't have to generate anything. You don't have to build a generator to use the energy. You just merely tap into it and hang on, and you got all the energy you'd ever want to use. Well, he was interested enough to Carr brought a little model in his briefcase, and he opened up the briefcase, and out came the little 12-inch craft that we brought, and it simply levitated out of the briefcase and levitated over his desk and around the room. And the engineers got very excited and said, wait a minute, you guys, and this was before the days of the well-known remotes that we have now, but they wanted to make sure we didn't have a remote somewhere. So they asked us to take off our jackets, and they scanned us for remotes. And the rep asked us, well, how are you operating? And I said, well, we're in synthetic vibration. We're using resonant frequency broadcasted from our mind, not our brain, but our mind. Well, that went over his head, and he said, well, I don't understand any of this. And what you're advocating here is we've got hundreds of thousands of people working for us around the world, and you're going to put a lot of people out of business, and they've got families to feed and everything. And what do you say about that? And Carr said, well, sir, if you give people the freedom, and we're calling it free energy because it's always been free. Man's just tapped in and started charging for it. You give people the free energy, in which is 70% of their income goes for just the energy to run their lives. If you give them that free, which we represent here in our efforts, because this device that you're looking at can be scaled down to be operating in their homes, in their businesses, just as well as in space or anywhere else. Let's see. So he said, if you give people all the energy and they free, then they will have the ability to do what they came here to do, to be. You'd have brilliant scientists, brilliant doctors, brilliant everybody, because they would then tap in on their purpose in life. And their purpose in life on the planet is to remember love and the association with nature, using love, loving your work, loving your job, loving to get up and go to work, instead of the reverse, being tired or resentful about your job and so forth. You would love everything. And then when you're using love, everything is simple. It just kind of flows. It's just a natural flowing that goes through everything. And I know I'm getting off on different areas here, but he said, well, no, you can't. This is ridiculous. And what's your fuel source? And by the way, we had a Lexan over the top of the craft. You could look inside the craft, and these engineers were really looking inside the craft and said, well, where's your ignition switch? Where's your steering wheel and stuff? So, well, we don't have one. We're just operating with our minds. We know how to do this, and it's very simple, and everybody can do it, and they do it. They just don't realize it. And that's where consciousness comes in. You have to be consciously aware of who and what you are. You're an infinite being that with infinite powers that you've been given by the multiverse. You've always had it, and you always will. You just don't realize it, and you've scaled down to living in a very fundamental, low-density vibration for an experience, which is nice to have an experience in a lower density, which is in our case a third dimension. But it's not. There's more to life, and nowadays you can. In fact, I'll just quote this for the sake of your audience. If you go to the internet and type in University of Minnesota, isn't that it?
Yes.
And mind over mechanics, you'll see a demonstration of this using your mind. They use similar to a spaceship, using it around their gymnasium there, just using the mind to do this. And that has led to now they're using their minds to operate what they call drones and everything else. So it's not that far-fetched now. In those days, of course, it was just ridiculous. And he said it was. And he said, well, we were explaining how it operated, that you couldn't have an accident in it because of magnetic fields. And he said, well, that's going to get your insurance companies upset because they won't be able to make any money in that. And on it went. And so eventually he said, well, you guys are really outlaws. And if we have anything to do with you at all, it would upset the monetary system. You can't do this. So there was a lot of other things said, but to carry on, I'll round it off there. And as we were leaving, he said, well, Mr. Carr, if you guys put them up, we're going to have to shoot them down. You can't do this. This is against the present physics, let alone everything else, and laws that we have in our domain here. So that was the end of that. Carr said, well, our cover's blown now. We're going to have people coming in and looking us over and wondering what we're doing. And the powers that be, being the people behind the scenes that run the petroleum industries and the energy fields, will be wanting to come over and ask us to shut down, because this has been going on for years and years, even before us, for trying to get these ideas across. And the system isn't very happy with the competition of running things free and abundantly. So I guess I should go on to telling you about my experience with teleportation, right? I think that's what the original question was.
I would love it if you would, because what we want to know is where you once you were told you can't do this, how did you do it?
Well, Carr said, that they were going to be on us now and wanting to shut us down. And we had two 45-foot craft, one completely done and tested, and the other one still in progress. So he said, we'll take the 45-foot craft, and when you understand the laws of nature, you also begin to understand what nature is. It's a composition of energy, which is everywhere. And energy is who and what we are. Before we classify ourselves as being a body with flesh and blood and so forth and so forth, we are an energy field. This is the mind. This is not the brain. The brain is a computer that operates the body, if you will, but it has an optimum capacity, and it doesn't want to go beyond that. It just its job is to run the body efficiently, running all the system, cardiovascular and lymph system and so forth, and keeping them in check so that it can experience a third dimensional reality. But unfortunately, we forgot who and what we are. We're infinite beings that have been around forever. We are energy, and energy cannot be created or destroyed. This is the first law of physics in our laws of physics. But then we put a cap on it and put a box around it and said, well, this is all there is. This is, you live from the cradle to the grave, and this is called the third dimension. And that's really a sad state of affairs because people started buying into that and believing that, so they didn't know any better. And so our job was to wake up people and try and get them to understand there's a lot more to life. And I see by the time I better get to teleportation here pretty fast. So anyway, Carr said, let's get the 45-foot craft operational. So we had the engineers go downrange about 10 miles and measure it with their electronics, which is measuring the light and intensity frequencies of the area that we chose to go down to. And then I was chosen because I was just a lab tech. I mean, I wasn't an engineer, but I was very close to Carr, and I understood natural law very, very well. So he wanted me to go along. So the three of us, 2 engineers and myself, got on board the 45-foot craft. We sat around. There was a crystal in the center of the craft, and it was illuminated by what you could call a laser from underneath. And he said, you've got to relax your brain, because your brain is going to run you crazy trying to think this can't be done and it won't be done and everything else. Your brain is your worst enemy because it wants to protect the body from any interference from woo-woo technology or outside the box technology. But that's where we have to go, and that's time and space. Time and space is an invention, if you will, of a reality consisting of, in our case, humans, of measuring time and space. You know, the rotation of this and that, and the vector points have to come into alignment at certain times and space. But once you realize that space is infinite, there is no time and space. We create it with our thoughts, with our brain. We create the idea of time and space. So anyway, he said, well, we're going to fire it up, and you're going to go downrange, and then you're going to come back, and then we'll take it from there. If it's successful, we'll run this over every major city in the United States, and with bells and whistles, and get people to see there's something more to discover in life, and want to know more about what we're doing and how we're doing it and so forth. So he said, okay, gosh, the time's going so fast here. So the downrange, they measured this field of energy to be in the field equated to the light spectrum of aquamarine, the color of aquamarine. So we were sitting around in the center of the craft looking at the crystal, and it eventually got up to a changing colors quite rapidly into a steady, brilliant color of aquamarine, which lit the entire interior of the craft up. It was very beautiful. And that's at that point was all we could remember. The next thing we heard was Carr saying, "All right, come down for debriefing." That's the end of the experiment. So we thought, well, it didn't work. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't do anything. And so we went down and saw Carr and said, well, the experiment didn't work, did it? And he said, well, what makes you think it did? And he said, well, we didn't go anywhere. And he said, well, I told you before, you're going to be operating with your mind, not your brain. Your brain, just as I told you before you went in, just let it go to sleep. Just don't even think. Just let it go blank, because you're going to be traveling with your mind. Your mind is infinite. Your mind is everywhere because we're all connected. The energy fields from one point, from point A to point B, is no longer linear in fashion. It's instant, because you are energy as well as the energy of the multiverse. So you can go anywhere in time and space, beyond time and space. And it's an instant thing, not a linear time thing. So anyway, we said, well, I can't buy that. I didn't go anywhere. And they said, well, empty your pockets. We emptied our pockets, and there were sticks and stones and grass and everything. And so, well, where did that come from? And at the time, we couldn't recall. Nobody went on board. It was closed. We were in a very closed situation. Nobody came on board or anything. And he said, well, what you did was travel with your mind. Your brain is going to have a long time, for some of you, remembering and bringing it back into an area that you'll understand, because your brain doesn't want to accept it. But once you do, you'll remember everything for full detail, which I do now. I didn't then for quite a while. It took me months to actually realize what I had done and how we did it and so forth. So let's see. We were getting ready then to. It was a complete success. Carr said, "Fine, we'll get things ready and to go around to the different cities." And I know, without giving a lot of details on natural law, it's kind of hard to accept. But when I said things are instant, it means that we could go over all the cities of the United States within minutes. It wouldn't take us hardly any time at all, because it's all space, and we're interfacing with space, so that when we move, we are space itself, and vice versa. Space is us. So it wasn't going to be a problem to do that. But before we could get there, the military trucks, vehicles, big 10-wheeler trucks pulled in with all kinds of armed soldiers. And then these cars pulled in with all kinds of people with badges on, FBI and CIA or whatever they were. I don't remember at the time. But they wanted to see Carr, and they told us all to get together. And they said, we're closing you down because you are cease and desist, I think was the name or term, because you're attempting to overthrow the monetary system in the United States. And that could be construed as high treason, trying to, and you could be, put away forever, or your family would be. Anyway, we're shutting you down. We're confiscating everything. And so they did. They went in and took all our stuff, all our paperwork, all our stuff out of the labs, our small prototypes. Our larger craft was then transported, we found out later, to Los Alamos, New Mexico, and put 9 stories underground. They had tried to mount weapons on it, but in a magnetic field, weapons are obsolete. You don't need weapons. You only need love to operate things. You don't need fear. And fear is based on, weapons are based on fear. You can't operate this kind of a craft and have weapons. So let's see. So they did. They shut us down. They told us not to talk to each other. We watched the rest of our lives and don't try to do this again, et cetera, et cetera. But and so we were separated. We went into different areas, but we never stopped working on the craft. And in those days, we had moving parts. We had to create an effective magnetic field. You have counter-rotating, what we call vortices. And the electron accumulator as our heart of the craft was just a hollow cavity created by a double tetrahedron, just a hollow, like two ice cream cones stuck on together at the large opening. And this was a resonator cavity that once you resonate at any, well, let me explain it this way. The Earth is operating in what has been known as, and is still known, but it's changing rapidly, as a Schumann frequencies. The Earth is vibrating at a 8.7 or plus or minus hertz is what it's called, frequency. Now it's changing because we're in a gigantic change is happening in not only on the planet, but the whole universe that we've known of is changing, the cosmos itself. So now the Schumann frequency is changing from that to 9, 10, 11, 12. It's changing, and the whole magnetic field is being affected. But where was I?
I'd like to say one thing here.
Thanks.
Ralph always kind of forgets this, but evidently Otis Carr told all of his people that he wrote a book on, it's called Dimensions of Mystery. It was prose and poetry. And he said, when this book is decoded, you will see the spaceships return. And one of our pods, one of our groups of people in Australia actually decoded this about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so
effectively started building prototypes.
Yes.
Again. So we have now prototypes. We have things now waiting in the wings and equated to what we call free and abundant energy, because it doesn't require a lot of mechanical things to put them together. It's quite simple. You can make free energy devices in your kitchen if you want. I mean, those are things that we've been sitting on for years, trying to get people to look at, and we stopped asking, we stopped begging, we stopped any resistance on the system itself, because we felt that it had to play itself out using force. The system is now in a decayed mode. It's got to the point of we're only a button away from completely annihilating the human race. We could destroy it overnight if we so choose to press a button. But it's at this point where we have to be now all, and when I say we, that's the pods that we have. We have hundreds of them all around the world. When we're invited to come out, all the visionaries, the little garage shore mechanics, I can't even talk, that have these inventions operating on the principle of free and abundant energy. Once we're invited now to come out, then almost overnight, with the people's acceptance, not the power companies anymore. It has to be the people, because the power companies have so much power that they've kept people in a very dense and collective servitude mode, if you will. They don't think for themselves. They're being run by what they're told to do and so forth. But once we're invited, we can open our doors and show people what we have, which is free and abundant energy, and it has nothing to do with the servitude and the toiling that we've done all these years in life to get by. And I'm looking at the clock, and it looks like I've got 5 minutes. I'm sorry, but honey, would you like to say something?
Well, it's such an interesting story that Ralph was able to teleport and finally, after a few months, remember it. And teleportation is such an exciting thing that he's done other teleportation that he can remember at the time he's, right after he has done it. And we're all doing that. And I feel like this is what we're going to be talking quite a bit about. Ralph's going to be speaking at the conference in November put on by Paula Harris. And so it's an exciting time
That's in Laughlin, Nevada, right?
Laughlin, Nevada, November 13th, 14th, and 15th. And it's because of people like Paula Harris and these other people that are putting on conferences.
And you as well, I might add.
Yes, and putting this out in the ethers, that we all are remembering who we were created to be and what we're here for. And this story of Ralph's is a true story, and it's just like we need to remember that we're all doing some of these things ourselves.
Our brains
are so exciting. It is so exciting to me because every word that you're saying, I don't understand the science of it, but the essence of it, the energy of it, is speaking to me, to our listeners, and I too will be speaking at the StarWorks USA conference in Laughlin, and I'm so looking forward to meeting both of you in person. At which point and maybe sooner, I will share with you some ideas that might be able to help you get your ideas, your experiences, your knowledge, your information out there. We have a few minutes. Do you have, Marsha or Ralph, do you have any last profound statement? And everything you've said has been profound, that you would like to share with our audience today?
Well, I would like to, because I realize coming on for just an hour, some of our talks go on for 4 and 6 hours, and we still don't cover everything. But in an hour, I've hit on different areas, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of wonderment in the listeners of how does that work with this, and so forth and so on. So I've referred them to our website, which is Blue Star Enterprise. That's Blue Star Enterprise, all one word, .com. And on there, you'll find, among other things, the manuscript that Martha mentioned, that Carr wrote because he had to hide the teleportation, the levitation ideas into a manuscript, a novel, a book, that when the time was right for them to come back into existence, somebody would come along and decode it. And that's on the website, by the way. That's volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you're really interested, you'll see how the spaceships work, how you can, understand the principles involved, because it's far above just the human idea. We are much more than human. We are spiritual beings. We are developed in a divine essence of everything, and we have everything. We've got everything there is in the multiverse within us, and the power is inside, not outside. We don't have to go looking outside to do anything. We can go now inside and communicate via our intuition, our inner pilot eye, if you so choose, to affect the change. And if you have any questions and really need to get in touch with us, someone on the website will direct you to us, and we'll be glad to answer anything we can for you. The time to wake up is now, because we're in a very destructive situation. We're down to the wire now, where we're talking about a very big volatile situation that's growing, and we need these changes. We need to come into alignment with natural law and use love as our guide.
Absolutely. Ralph, Marsha, thank you both so much for being my guests today on Move Into the Magic. I'm going to stay in touch with you guys, and I want to thank all of our listeners. I know you're going to have questions for Ralph and Marsha. Again, their contact information is bluestarenterprise.com. And I hope that all of you will join me next week when once again I introduce to you someone who is truly raising the level of vibration of our beautiful planet. So, till then, this is Maxine Taylor reminding you that